Welcome to Architectural Series, Architects Talk, sponsored by Kalebodur. Today we have two very distinguished guests actually, Beatriz Colomina and Wigley. First of all, thank you very much for being with us, for giving your precious time to us. Yesterday we had a wonderful lecture from you in Middle East Technical University. Maybe, I mean, you're already known by the Turkish, especially in the academicians, within the academicians, but after this Istanbul Design Biennale thing, you are very popular, both in the architectural and the art chambers, let me say. So, but still, maybe I can introduce you with few words, as already known. Beatriz Colomina is an architectural historian, and she started in Columbia University, then now she passed to Princeton as the director of graduate studies. She's working on media, modernity, sexuality, space, mass media, lots of things at a time. So it's very difficult to address a specific issue in a similar way. I don't know how to address Mark, theoretician, academician, curator, editor, he started in Princeton, but then became the dean for the Graduate School of Columbia, Graduate School of Architecture, and you were very well known because of the MoMA exhibition, of course, as anywhere around the world, and the magazine assemblage was significantly important for us. I would also like to thank Erimtan Museum for giving us this opportunity to be here. Starting from, maybe continuing from yesterday's lecture, may I start with you asking, how do you locate yourself as an architectural historian? Because the issues that we are talking around is not the classical issues. We are talking about sexuality, media, we are talking about X-ray architecture. So it is a little bit different than the classical definition of architecture. How do you locate yourself as an architectural historian?
Oh, well, thank you very much for inviting us to be here. We are very happy to participate in this program. First of all, I studied architecture, and then only afterwards I did the PhD. So I did my PhD already when living in New York. And in fact, I was first a fellow in the, as I said yesterday during the lecture, in the New York Institute for the Humanities, which was a very interdisciplinary think tank and institute where there were people from other disciplines, people like, I don't know, Susan Sontag or Wolfgang Sibelbusch or Richard Sennett, etc. And then completely changed my way of thinking about architecture. It was the very beginning of my PhD. And I started thinking about integrating the thinking of architecture as part of culture in general. So all these things that you think are not classical actually are very much part of architecture as well. There is a lot of architecture in literature. There is no way to think about the city without about thinking all the other manifestations of culture. So I don't think of architecture as an isolated discipline, but I think of architecture as part of culture. And I'm much more interested in addressing a much more wider public. And in fact, you know, my books are not read by architects only, but by a huge amount of different disciplines, from film to literature to art to I don't know what. And I think that is actually very important, that we don't isolate architecture from the rest of the cultural production and also from people's life. I mean, architecture is part of everybody everyday life.
Actually, assemblage was a ground for this multidisciplinary discussions in architecture. I don't know, I have nearly the old copies, but was it 40 or 41 or something like that till it has been ended? I don't know, maybe when I look at it, it is a magazine that we need today. I think. Why?
Well, I think you're asking an interesting question. I mean, Assemblage was a magazine founded by Michael Hayes, who was doing his PhD in MIT, and immediately it kind of galvanized a generation of which we are proud.
But you had been the editor for some
No, we were on the board.
We were both.
We were on the editorial board.
Yeah, we were on the editorial board. So we were kind of like a gang.
Yeah, I know.
And this gang was coming, in Beatriz's case, from Spain. I was coming from New Zealand. People were coming from the south. But also some people were coming from physics, some people were coming from literature, some people from philosophy.
Right.
So it was this moment in the middle of the 1980s when a new generation, all of whom had a deep love for architecture, had also something like a deep disappointment that maybe architecture could play a stronger role, and therefore we needed a new set of ideas. So a kind of generation came, and it was really very exciting to see how architecture could be thought in a new light. Actually, following just what Beatriz is saying, thought in terms of politics and economics and art and culture and sculpture and electronics, and really shake architecture a bit. And of course, since architecture is expensive and heavy and often asked by society to represent stability and certainty,
depending upon lots of different parties at the time.
Exactly. But because it has this kind of a heavy reputation, I think people thought you could not shake it, you know, because it's so heavy. But we were a bit young and a bit naive, and that was really beautiful because we didn't have any doubt that architecture could be shaped, and you could discover many new ways to think, many new histories. So immediately it became possible to talk about modern architecture differently, classical architecture, society, and politics. And one last thing was exciting about that generation is that, I mean, really, we didn't agree with each other about anything at all. In fact, we were on the editorial board, and our main role was to tell them that all of their decisions were stupid. And this was nice. This was not a school. This was not the beginning of a new dogma. I think in this sense it was quite different from the previous generation of intellectuals who felt there should be a new flag. And I think even today we are kind of anti-flag, in a certain way anti-school.
But you came easily together with the representative of an older generation, Philip Johnson. That was an interesting experience, I think, that you two came together and make a very, I mean, when you look at the influence, maybe at the beginning it was not like that, but when you look at the end product, it became very influential, that exhibition in MoMA. The original name was not Deconstruction in Architecture, was it? Deconstructivist architecture. Deconstructivist architecture.
Yes. I mean, the thing
architecture of imperfectionism or something.
Yeah, but it was not the same exhibition. That's also a great story because, of course, this exhibition now has a lot of respect and it has a kind of dignity of a kind of a statesman or something. But at the time, it was pure provocation. Philip Johnson was very easy to work with because he was very unhappy with the Museum of Modern Art. He was very unhappy with architecture. He also wanted to shake things. So that was interesting, to meet a very old man who has a lot of influence, who wants to be like a child.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think the most interesting people, they want to be children again, and the child is always thinking things could be different. So the exhibition was really trying to wake up the museum, wake up our architectural field. It was a kind of provocation. So now that everybody takes it so serious and now it's very respectable, I'm not sure what to think. I do think you're right that it was very influential, but it was not influential stylistically. I think it was more
thought-wise and
thought-wise, even the kind of language that people, the kind of expectation. For example, one of the main arguments of this exhibition was that maybe architecture could make us uncertain, not stability anymore, but a questioning architecture, an architecture that makes you not sure. And I think now you see that this of course opens a very big space, but this is the same space that, for example, Beatriz and myself and others are working in. If architecture is not so sure, not so certain, there are many, many questions we can ask of architecture. And architecture, which is so beautiful, for a long time these questions have not been asked. But as Beatriz was saying in her lecture, they were asked at the very beginning. Right. So we forgot.
Can we say that Istanbul Design Biennale will be another provocative ground, maybe, after all these years, looking at the title and the expectation?
Yes, of course, it's a provocation. It's a provocation also in terms of what we understand for design. Design has been, for the most part, understood in a very narrow sense. In relation to the way it was established as a concept about 200 years ago in London, around the debates of industry and design that led to the great exhibition in London. We want to expand that notion of design. We are actually surrounded by a museum of design. All these objects are also objects of design. So the provocation is to expand the bandwidth, to go back to 200,000 years, to the beginning of our humanity, and think that we have been always designing, and that design is what makes us human. So it is a kind of rejection of these two things in a big way. First of all, the idea that a biennale is 2 years, and you report on the I don't know, new novelty of the design in 2 years. We are completely against the idea of biennales as trade shows. This will never be a trade show. There will not be objects in that sense. And also against the idea of the 200 years of design too, and this narrow definition of design, and in favor of much more expanded understanding of design that goes from 200,000 years to 2 seconds, because of course we now live in a culture in which we all have become designers. Even a 5-year-old kid is designing with their phones, and so we wanted also to account for this very reduced time of the social media, in which one can design. One designs oneself in Facebook, in Pinterest, in all these different social medias, and this is also a space for design, right? So this is the idea of the exhibition.
Yeah, new design. Is there anything contextual? I mean, is it totally an international ground integrated with all the thought, or is there anything in terms of your expectations, a contribution coming from Turkey or coming from this geography? Is there a unique contribution? We think in a way we have really very inspired by being in Turkey. Yeah. Of course, Turkey is in a difficult moment, and probably has been in a difficult moment for thousands of years. And it is also maybe a place where design was incubated.
So for us, a completely uninteresting idea is that we will come from New York to somehow explain to Turkey what is design. It is the exact opposite. We invite wonderful people from around the world and wonderful people from Turkey to consider exactly what happened when the human first emerged and first started to make the first tools and ornaments and so on. We were just in the Museum of the Anatolian Civilizations, which, as Beatriz says, for us this is a design museum. We're really interested. What is the relationship between the cell phone and, let's say, the first marine shell that was found in a cave 40,000 years old in a Turkish cave? What's the relationship between this object, which was a form of decoration, a form of communication, and this new communication device we have? So really the answer to your question is that we take our inspiration from the archaeological layers, the layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of design in this part of the world and what is now called Turkey in particular.
Right, so it has been really an inspiration. I don't think we may have come with the same concept in another place. Had we been asked to do a design biennale in a place like London or New York or Chicago or some place like this, I don't think we would have come up with this idea. It's precisely from being in Turkey and being exposed to a country with such a deep historical roots.
In a way, investigating different layers of design.
That is impossible not to start thinking in a different way, right?
But the text is very provocative in the sense that it ends with design needs to be redesigned.
Yes.
What does it mean?
Well, it means exactly that if we think of design in this very narrow sense, the idea of good design that was established precisely around this time of the 200 years, so then we think that design needs to be rethought, that needs to be reconceptualized. That's what we mean with redesign. It's kind of a play on the concept, right?
Yeah, of course it's one of those sentences that if we redesign design, then the idea of redesign changes as well. But we don't mean by this some kind of...
it's open to become tautological in this.
Yes,
no.
But you know, this total... But we have to think about this, because if the human is the designing species, and if design is always about the design of the human, then actually what's interesting about the human species and what's unique is that we design ourselves.
Yeah, it turns to be a tool to design the species themselves.
So our relationship, so there is a kind of chicken and egg between the human and the design, right? So I think we would say that the tautology, the sense that the sentence turns on itself, is because design always turns on itself. And we would like to reflect on that in this particular moment of history, which, as Beatriz says, is not the same as 200 years ago when globalization, industrialization was beginning. Now we are maybe we are on the edge of destroying this planet.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's maybe our biggest design ever, and it's a disaster. So yeah, I think it should be time we change our idea about design.
Conflict of, I mean, starting aim and end result, there's a kind of a gap between the expectations. I mean, trying to have a better world. Or I asked the question of contextuality because yesterday I asked a similar question. When we look at the architectural theory and architectural thought, architectural history, it is always, the mainstream is always concentrated around what's happening in the West and Western world, including, of course, Europe and America. Lots of examples are from there, and because the technology and the sources of modernism, maybe the idea is coming out, it's related to developments with science and technology, etc. So it's quite understandable. But on the other hand, there is a periphery, including Turkey.
Yes.
Maybe now emerging countries in terms of lots of construction, including Dubai, most of the Middle Eastern countries, emerging China with immense construction, lots of people. So, I mean, when you look at the other side of the world, the other half of the world, what do you see? I mean, is there anything that is open to rewrite that history, or I mean, to look at things in a different way?
Right, but this is not the other side of the world. This is the world. This is the center in so many ways. Look at all these architects that we
actually it's an artificial definition. But when you define the mainstream architects, I mean, we are teaching modern architecture around maybe 300 buildings examples.
But when you take the mainstream
in every book.
Right, but when you take the mainstream figures like Le Corbusier, you cannot understand Le Corbusier without understanding his trip, what he calls the trip to
Istanbul.
to the Orient. He calls the Orient trip, where he comes to Italy and Greece and makes his way to Turkey, and finds actually in this part of the world the inspiration for his architecture. Right, so and when you think about Adolf Loos, also one of the main figures of the beginning of modernity in architecture, he also was very much in love with Turkey, came many times, and found a lot of inspiration in this architecture. You're right that a lot of the history of modern architecture has been concentrated in the West, perhaps because of accessibility to the language and to the materials, but we also have
ease of research.
But in recent years, there have been very important studies coming from students from here, and even students from here that then have done their PhDs in the United States that have brought a lot of the modernity of Turkey into the discourse, and many studies of architecture are now changing radically, right? For example, Latin America was also something that we never study or look at it very closely, and now it's becoming more and more part of the education. The same with Asia,
right.
I
mean, maybe for us, what's important is that there would be many answers to your question. It's not simply to say that the West view is dominant and now we should turn our eyes away from the West, because if those eyes are the same eyes, we will only see the non-West as the non-West. And so I think what you have seen in the last 20 years ago, and it's very important for us, is a kind of undoing of the West, which means also looking at the role of the East inside the West, and perhaps mainly our research has been to loosen the assumptions built into the dominant discourse and allow another generation, because we are teachers, many of our best students are from here, from Turkey, but rather than point them the way or have them somehow represent some new kind of authenticity, we just try to loosen the grip of these assumptions. I give a quick example. One of the reasons we are fascinated with archaeological research in this region is, of course, that concept of design invented 200 years ago was exactly invented in a kind of colonial spirit in London, and based on a kind of a way of thinking that has Europe as the kind of golden moment of European, of human existence. So we come out of Africa, we pass through what the British would call the Middle East, but only when the human arrives in Europe do all these wonderful things happen. So one of the reasons we want to concentrate on the archaeology in this region is precisely to quietly undo this assumption. For example, in the exhibition we will exhibit the 13th century Islamic Renaissance machines, mechanisms, which, if you look at these machines, Leonardo becomes a little bit boring, right? And if this is a way of just saying, look, other stories can be told, and this is we do not want to be telling the new story. We want to make an invitation for different people to tell different stories.
Right.
That's true, yeah. I mean, but it's not limited with the archaeology and the past.
No.
It was very interesting that when this exhibition of deconstruction had been on the table in Turkey, some of the architects said that, oh, it is the architecture already existing in the third world. You know, all the vernacular, look at all the vernacular buildings and the accidentality of architecture. I mean, ad hoc, eclectic, and production, and the alternative way of thinking. That was the actually kind of a vernacular third world view or idea that is now validating, but it has been never related to such a cultural standpoint. It has been, it always came with the Western philosophy, I think. I mean, all Derrida and other issues. Of course, it's understandable, but that was the thing that I mean. When you look at this geography, it is possible to see, of course, alternative and other issues. Of course, if we come back to this, the work of students tackling with other issues, how do you see architectural education at this very moment? I mean, with all these cultural, let's say, richness and multidisciplinary existence, is it possible to continue with our traditional way of education, or?
No, I think it's very interesting what is happening in education now. When I started teaching at Princeton, the majority of the students were students from the West. They were students from America most of the time, and now and then a few Europeans, and actually a few students from Turkey. Some of them had also studied in Germany and then come to the United States, or because you have such a great like universities like METU and schools where they already speak English. I suppose that was an easier track than in other countries. But now we're in a situation that is completely different. There is almost no, I mean, there's very few American students. You realize that you have a lot of Asian students, and you have a lot of European students, and you have a lot of students from India and from the Middle East, and the whole form of education has changed because you don't have the same base, you don't have the same kind of traditional teaching that you can rely on. You have multiple people with different backgrounds and different forms of understanding the world and different intelligence too. And I like that. I found that really fascinating, but it makes also for a more experimental kind of
and it expands
education.
the ground of research and investigation. I
yes,
think
but it's also
cultural direction.
Right, but it also changes the way in which you teach. You don't assume anymore that there is such a thing as a canon that everybody needs to understand or know, but you know, you kind of do something entirely different.
Yeah, and that's a very big, almost biological change. There are at least 1 million architecture students in the world at the moment. So that's a lot of brains.
Half of them in China, maybe.
Could be, could be. Well, half the new buildings are there, so that would be okay. But, so you have, I mean, a lot of brain power that can be used. So is architectural education good? No, it's terrible. I think that most schools of architecture are never addressing in the schools the actual situation of the world, politically, economically, socially, in any way. So that's very strange. But if you look at all the schools of the world, you will always find in architecture schools beautiful teachers and really beautiful students. So we are really wasting this opportunity. What is fantastic in most architecture schools is this studio environment where architects have a special gift to combine different forms of knowledge. And by the way, most universities now, philosophers and scientists and engineers and doctors are very jealous of the architect's ability to combine. She's able to bring together.
That is the case in Turkey as well.
So we have in our architectural education a fantastic asset, which is this kind of multidimensional, open-ended, synthetic intelligence. But we are not applying it in a very interesting way, and I think this is very sad. So we have a strange combination, as Beatriz says, really a magnificent new, multidimensional, highly ethical generation of students, but institutionally we have mainly schools of architecture that are using a concept of the architect and a concept of architecture and buildings and society that maybe was not even very good 50 years ago. I mean, really it's astonishing, and the basic idea is you will really become an architect another 10, 15 years after you graduate. This is not good.
Isn't it also true for same for the architecture itself? I mean, the buildings that are produced. When you look at it, there's a significant sense of placelessness and divergence from the ideology, and lots of. I mean, there is an ease of production. I don't know, but. When you compare with the past, there are no, for example, not much utopian approaches or radical statements coming from the field of architecture. There are no more, for example, movements like archigram or something like that. Is it because of the general state of the society of consumption or media society? All these, I mean, on one hand, it has, of course, perfect opportunities and positive effects, but on the other hand, it has a all these discussions of diversity. We are going into a kind of a very uniform society structure.
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure either. And actually, we never make these kinds of judgments. We are historians, right? So the historian would say, archigram, for example, they say they became a group because they thought their teachers were very boring.
Yeah, that's
so
what I'm saying.
They kind of so maybe if we put the two ideas together, we need maybe the schools are not boring enough. So, but also when archigram began with a new form of communication, this little magazine, probably none of the teachers thought it was serious, and maybe right today
even themselves maybe.
Yeah, so maybe today there may be groups working, young architectural groups working with new kinds of media and new kinds of ideas.
Definitely.
And we are not yet taking it serious because we don't realize how amazing that is. So maybe we have this conversation 20 years from now, and we say, well, there are no groups like that, that great Instagram group that grew up in Istanbul.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I think it's a very hard.
It is very hard.
Very hard to judge, you know.
Yeah, and I'm not so sure what you were trying to get at also with the idea that the schools are not addressing problems of today. We don't want the schools to be responding either too much to the practice, no? The schools are a place of speculation. They are a place of you know, I'm completely against the idea of schools of architecture that prepare the students for the profession.
No, this was not what I was saying. I meant more, for example, we know that we know that the way a human is living today, like the relationship we have with our cell phones, is so radical that we have become a new species, right? So in theory, since 1983, we have the cell phone, and we now behave completely differently. We live in a different world. We occupy electronic space with a great precision, and we occupy physical space very imprecisely. But if you look into architecture schools, you don't find any reflection.
I disagree completely.
Yeah?
I found the students of architectural Princeton extremely tuning with this reality, studios that address multiple questions. I mean, it was even at the Biennale, the whole changing of the way in which we occupy space, the way in which our apartments are becoming different, the sharing economy is changing our ways of living. And students are extremely aware of this.
Sensitive to this.
And they bring it into the classroom, but also into their studios. And they are designing already with this mentality. It's maybe us that do not understand what they are doing, but definitely I'm super interested in everything they are doing, both at the level of the studio design and in seminars. And in fact, this has become my contemporary research is precisely on this question of if my first book was Privacy and Publicity, and it addressed the issue of architecture in the age of the media, of radio, of photography, of film, etc. The next stage of this research is privacy and publicity in the age of social media, and I found that I would not even have arrived at this subject if I was not constantly surrounded by students that are constantly on this, and it's from them precisely that I learned how much this space is important and is redefining our sense of
but I think that you're a
public
great
and private.
But that's because you're a great teacher. You're a great teacher, and so of course when you look at your students, you see that. But if I look at all the schools around the world, I think so many schools work. You can even look at the human figure that is drawn.
That's true. It may not be a representative case, which is the general case.
There are students.
You may be lucky
making these buildings and having a structural engineer check the details of their drawings and very, I mean, there's a kind of nostalgia for an architecture that maybe was never really there. We are maybe of the view that architecture should ask questions. And so the question, education then would be how to help students to ask questions. But so many schools really, the teachers think they already have the answer.
Yeah, I think that's a very important statement, yes.
But I think that, I mean, Beatriz is pointing to this new energy and new intelligence that is rising up, and maybe this will dissolve the institutional habits.
Right. I guess I'm a bit more optimistic.
More optimistic about education?
No, about the capacity of students to, in a way, teach themselves too. I mean, I think in a way, in a school, you learn much more from your classmates than from the teachers. So in a way, an architecture school, most of the learning happens when we are all gone and they are left to themselves in their studios. And this kind of energy that emerges out of this is, for me, the most interesting aspect of education.
Do you have the same optimism when you look at the contemporary scene of architecture?
No, the contemporary scene of architecture are not very optimistic, except for a few isolated examples. Right, the majority of it is very banal and mindless, but at the same time, this has always been the case. There has always been enormous, significant amount of architecture, the majority of it probably, which was not very interesting. You talk about archigram, this is a kind of a minute thing along with other groups on that period that we now remember, but the majority of things that were being built at the time has nothing to do with that. In fact, they didn't build anything.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, things had always been like this, but there's now it was multiplied in terms of numbers, and the scales are becoming bigger and bigger, and it is transforming the environment that.
Yeah, I think I see what you're saying. a little bit what we would like to do with the Biennale. I mean, I think the architectural community does not have the intellectual tools to engage with this new world. They run into the real estate, basically they cannot get past the relationship with the real estate. And what we are saying in the Biennale is, well, what would it mean to be a designer when now the weather is being designed and your human genome and your children and your new kinds of animal and plant, and now that the whole planet is covered with design, a layer of design that is geologically, what then is design in that space? And I think you're right that things have become bigger and bigger and bigger, but we think even bigger again. And if you look at that moment of Archigram, for example, they were very much thinking about the space program and about the human capacity had been transformed. And actually, of course, now the space program looks like a small technological trick.
Yeah,
so we are saying something like what it means to be human has gone through a total transformation in the last 100 years, but the concept of design has not. And of course, architects today are lost. They are used as toys in a big series of empires. And as Beatriz says, maybe this is always true, but there's always one or two figures that find a way to make us think. And we think if we generate in Istanbul a very, very vibrant conversation about what is design or what could be design, maybe it increases the chances of some people doing the really important work.
This is rethink what they are already.
And just to say, this is propaganda for our show, right? But we think we want a different model. The real work that we want to celebrate is not in the show, but the work that could be liberated by the show. So we're teachers. We're looking for a Biennale as a form of education.
A tool
Yeah.
to transform other things, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, in a similar way, I mean, what you said about the education, architects are not asking the questions, but they are just realizing what is put on the table directly. So, I mean, we lost a kind of a critical distance to the program and design, I think. So it is all these square meters and sizes are coming eventually from there. What do you think about Turkish contemporary architecture as far as you have seen Istanbul and Ankara? Maybe two different cities. I mean, apart from, of course, the historical part, when you look at the new buildings, what do you see?
You know, if you take a city like Istanbul, Istanbul offers a kind of window, a very, very good window onto our world. So the issue is not what is Turkish of that situation, but what is contemporary of that situation. So for example, if you would like to discuss the contemporary world, well, Istanbul is a very good place to do it because Istanbul is one of the most layered cities in the world. All the layers are somehow there. So it's almost like a historical document, and you can feel modernity
inside it.
In operating, and mainly operating in a very ugly way. And maybe modernity is ugly. So we're not so much interested in specific buildings or specific, there are very beautiful buildings and very beautiful designers, but let's say mainly the effect of modernity in the current situation is a kind of a chaos on the surface, which is driven by an absolute precise logic behind. It's not at all chaotic, very particular decisions. So I think it's just a laboratory of modernity. For example, it has the worst traffic in the world, or
Not the worst.
competes with Bombay, Moscow. In other words, it competes with the great cities of the world. Only great cities have traffic problems. A traffic problem means your city cannot absorb the interest in that city.
What about Ankara?
No traffic problem.
We haven't seen much of
So not so great. But is it different? Isn't it? We know nothing. You know this. We can only speak to you. But
Yeah, that's true.
It has been really nice to be in Ankara because Ankara was, in a way, invented.
That's true.
And Istanbul is the exact opposite.
It's more like being in Madrid or in Moscow. It's these cities that are, invented in a way, right? With a history. But it's not, I mean, architects in Istanbul also complain a lot about the conditions of work in the city, but this is not very different from the conditions of the architects' work in other cities. I don't think that's part of our interest. We are not discussing at all in our design biennale this question. We are asking much bigger questions.
Yeah.
Questions of how design has become, the world has become design, how there is a huge layer of design encrusting the world, and what does this mean for us as humans? We may be the only species that systematically has managed to design their own extinction. I mean, other animals were become extinct because of us, but we are the only ones that have done it for ourselves, like very systematically, and we are on our way to accomplish it unless somebody stops us or we stop ourselves, but it's kind of getting late. So we also want to address this issue.
Yeah, and this is such a beautiful point that Beatriz makes, and it takes your attention away from just the city, but the whole, I mean, really to think of design as almost a continuous layer. And so in the exhibition we try to show that the Mediterranean is, let's say, more designed than a city. Very precise space. And the tragedy that we watch is related to this design. So rather than complain about real estate development in Istanbul, more interesting it is to discuss the design of the Mediterranean. Even the British word, the expression Middle East, it's a design.
That's true.
It's really a design, and an ugly design. You want to add another ugly design, the suburbs, this American invention. This is a more or less criminal model of how we live together on the planet. And this is the worst export of the United States.
Gated society.
Yes. So this and just the idea of spending so much resource to have everybody spread with so much. So these are the really terrible models. Compared to that, compared to the American suburb, Istanbul is infinitely beautiful, even in its current chaotic, overdeveloped craziness. It is still more beautiful, more humane, more cosmopolitan, better than the American suburb. For sure.
It reminds me the words of Jean Baudelaire. I mean, he counts a lot of negative aspects about New York. I mean, it's crowded. I mean, everywhere there's dust and crime and everything. And at the end, he finishes this sentence with, I can't imagine a world without New York.
We cannot imagine a world without Istanbul.
That's the same. Are there any clues about the exhibition, the Biennale exhibition?
What kind of clues do you want? We offer a lot of clues.
I mean, what will we see in the exhibition? There were participations, there were suggestions.
We will occupy 5 different venues of Istanbul. Each venue has a different personality. One is a school, one is a laboratory, one is a broadcast station, one is a time machine, and one is a museum. So in each space a different personality, and around 80 different participants from different fields.
And different countries.
Different countries. Many from Turkey, many from outside. But what architects, artists,
designers, but also filmmakers, philosophers.
So there is a disciplinary variety as
scientists,
well.
Brain scientists.
Brain scientists. I mean, people from very different parts of the world. Right. And we will talk about design in terms of archaeology, but also in terms of the design of the planet and in terms of the design of the of the body
Yeah.
and the design of the space of social media, the design of the cell phone, and so many different aspects of design. So it's a very comprehensive.
And when you are coming back?
Next time, we don't know.
We don't know.
We come back a lot.
Yeah.
But I think the main thing is this question, are we human? And we are asking each, we wrote a manifesto, as you know, and we invite all these different people to respond. And the visitor is the most interesting object
Of the exhibition, yeah.
Right.
is the most designed, the most, and so we think it's a very urgent question. Are we human? And the real clue for the exhibition is we will ask that question again and again and again. But the exhibition becomes
Not expecting to find an answer.
no, well, we don't
Multiple answers.
know. Multiple answers.
Yes, 80
Maybe.
answers at least from 80 different teams. Many ways to.
But maybe so it will be very dense, very multidimensional, not a trade show. And the visitor, who could be a member of public or a member of the profession or intellectual, they will all be asked to consider whether they think of themselves as human or not.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And one last thing is the relationship with the Archaeological Museum is very, very important for us. That it is one of the venues of the exhibition and our most important partner. The main argument is to say design is, what is archaeology? Archaeology is design. A design biennale will be about archaeology.
Yeah, and I think this whole process and the product will be open to lots of alternative grounds to continue with. I mean, lots of writings and discussions and maybe papers. I don't know, and we will be talking it a lot. Thank you very much for being
You're
with
welcome.
us. Would you like to add anything that you would like me to ask, maybe?
No, thank you. I mean, I think
No,
it's been
your questions were really
very good.
very interesting, and for us it is a very exciting and urgent project, and we have a little bit the feeling that in Istanbul we can really ask what is design in a way you cannot in London or New York or Paris, where everybody thinks they know.
Yeah, okay, that's I think.
So the place that has the longest history of design, Istanbul, is the place that is less sure what is design. So that's the right place to talk about.
Yeah, I think that's one of the key sentences.
The young places, Paris, New York, London, these places with a very short history, they think they know.
That's true. Okay, thank you very much for being with us. Hope to see you again soon.
It's a pleasure.
Many times.
A pleasure.
All right, thank you very much.